Welcome to episode 301 of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. I am Dave Deacon. Yeah, we're kicking off our third year of digging up dirt on crops that are grown across the Great Plains and discussing ways of keeping them going in some of the craziest growing conditions on the planet. You're in for a fun episode today because we're learning about one of the newest members of the Oklahoma State University's Plant and Soil Sciences Department, Dr. Liberty Galvin. We'll learn about her and her plans for researching and attacking weeds across Oklahoma coming up in just a few minutes. And we'll be covering a lot of cool stuff in this episode too, and you will be able to find information on what is covered on our website, reddirtagronomy.com. And as always, we start with a quick trip around the table for an introduction to the dream team of dirt and everything that grows from it. Let's start with Oklahoma State University Extension Cropping System Specialist.
Well, once she gets rid of the grasses, then she can just go to the easy stuff, right?
Dr. Josh Lofton. Next to him, we find Oklahoma State University Ag Engineer.
Do you have your ninja card? You lost it as in misplaced it, or you lost it as it got taken because I couldn't answer the...
Dr. Randy Taylor. And across from him is Oklahoma State University Extension Precision Nutrient Management Specialist and holder of the longest title on the podcast.
You know what? The grassy weeds respond amazingly to nitrogen fertilizer.
Dr. Brian Arnell. If you're out and about this Friday and Saturday, January 12th and 13th, 2024, stop by and see us at the KNID AgriFest at the Chisholm Trail Expo Center in Enid. We will be set up in the Oklahoma Wheat Commission's booth, recording a couple of episodes of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. So come by the Chisholm Trail Expo Center in Enid this Saturday, January 12th and 13th, for the KNID AgriFest. We look forward to talking with you, and we may even get you on the podcast. So let's jump into this episode with a very quick introduction of our guest by Dr. Josh Lofton. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast.
We have here one of our new weed scientists here in the department, Liberty. Give us a little bit of background about yourself.
Thanks, Josh, for the invitation today. I'm Dr. Liberty Galvin. What should I tell you about myself? I grew up here in Oklahoma. I think a lot of people are pretty excited about the fact that I'm an Okie. I went to Oklahoma State as an undergrad. Dr. Brian Arnell was my soil nutrient management teacher, and Here I am back to haunt him.
Do you have your ninja card?
You know what? I lost my ninja card at one point, and it still haunts me to this day.
Sounds like a reprint's in order because I'm printing this week.
Hey, get me one. Yeah.
You lost it as in misplaced it, or you lost it as it got taken because I couldn't answer the...
We're about to find out.
No. I did pass that test. I did earn that card, but it was over 10 years ago. So
Okay.
Like Josh said, I'm a new weed scientist in the department. I spent the last 8 years at the University of California, Davis. I have a master's degree in international ag development. I have a PhD in horticulture and agronomy with an emphasis in weed science. A lot of my PhD research was really biology and ecology focused, but kind of used that knowledge to inform timing of application studies. I do a lot of early season phenology. So, for example, like what environmental conditions are ideal for germination of our target weeds, what's going to make these weeds come up, kind of things like that. And now I've found myself in the... there's two new weed scientists. I think that's an important piece. I am 85% extension, 15% research, and my colleague, Dr. Swati Shrestha, is 70% research, 30% teaching. So we work pretty closely together. I do a lot of the applied stuff, a lot of the field stuff. You'll see me at a lot of events, waving, trying to be funny, trying to get people to be my friends so I can take their money and solve all their weed problems. But Dr. Shrestha does a lot of, her big thing right now is we're trying to identify herbicide-resistant weeds, get a lot of that information updated for our growers here in the state. Yeah, and I'm excited to be back here. My family's pumped for me to be back here. Great time of year to find myself back in Oklahoma, so I look forward to working here and working with you guys. Helping you solve all of your weed problems, you know.
Well, we got lots of them. So.
That's the rumor, yeah. The word I keep hearing over and over and over is ryegrass. A big part of my verbatim in my job description, I am a member of the wheat improvement team. My background in California, I worked in rice cropping systems. So it's interesting to go from a pretty well coordinated rice group to a very well coordinated wheat group. So really working ryegrass is at the top of the list. Cheatgrass is really high up on the list. Wild oats, fleabane, broadleafs, we leave those in the back because they're pretty easy to manage. But my colleague and I actually both studied pretty similar weed species in rice. We both worked on what we like to call conspecifics, so it's weeds that have the same genus and species as the crop. So my big PhD question was, how do you kill rice in rice? Right? And so I see a lot of that applicable to the wheat environment here. How do you kill a grass that is incredibly similar to your crop? And it's an exciting challenge to work with, you know.
Talk a little bit about wild rice in rice.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our listeners probably haven't been in a rice field recently. So
hey,
drop that down and share a little bit about the fun and, or no, I'm sorry, not wild rice, weedy rice and
Weedy
rice.
rice.
I got see.
Yeah, there you go.
It's okay.
That's why I'm not speaking today.
So California weedy rice is a combination of wild rice, weedy species, and then a hybridization between weedy relatives and cultivated relatives. And the only thing that makes a rice a weed is that consumers don't want to eat it. So in California, the majority of the rice that we grow there are Japanese varieties for export to Japan. The Japanese people, their market is pretty stringent. If anybody's ever worked in like international exports, herbicide residue tolerances, Japan, the United Nations, the European Union, they're pretty strict on what their food commodities look like. They want their rice to be white, and they don't want it to be chalky. A lot of the similar quality standards that we have for wheat, cooking quality, all of that same stuff applies to rice. Fun fact, all of the sushi rice in the United States is grown in California. And so imagine you're at your fancy sushi restaurant and you look down and your sushi roll has red rice and black rice. Like this wasn't what I was expecting. I'm a little grumpy about it. So that's really like why we focus on weedy rice, is because people don't like it.
I mean, that seems very holistic. That should be the next marketplace, is multi-grain rice. Wow. Sorry.
I tell you what, people that are not very involved in agriculture, they love to promote some of these off-brand varieties. And one of the non-certified varieties in California, it's a red bran rice. We actually found that one of our dominant weedy species was a cross. So I actually got to work with the California Crop Improvement Association and met some really cool guys here with the Oklahoma, the OGI, the Oklahoma Genetics, really similar to the crop improvement folks. And that's something that I think is an exciting opportunity to work with these quality assurance type people. How can we use their impetus and their reach to kind of tell the general public, like, hey, the reason that we plant certified varieties is because we know what we're getting. We know that it won't crossbreed, or it won't, dehybridize, things like that. So really, and that was something, I started my PhD in 2017, and in 2019, the California Crop Improvement Association put into policy that all rice growers were required to purchase certified seed. And that actually really shut down the weedy rice issue. It dwindled, and when I left UC Davis in 2020, actually, it is 2023, in May of this year, weedy rice was actually no longer a serious problem. And that was because of the policy folks, all of the UC extension people, and the people like me, the researchers that were like, hey, this is how we can control it. These are our options.
So you're saying bin run wheat might be a problem in our weed control?
No comment.
One thing I learned about rice, I actually interviewed Dr. Lindquist not too long ago, and I asked him, why do you flood the fields? And he said it's weed control.
Yeah.
And I never realized that's one of the main reasons why floods are fielded.
Yeah.
Strike that, reverse it. Fields are flooded. Thank you. Man.
I knew what you meant. It's
Thank you.
okay.
I appreciate it.
But just like with any cropping system, now that we've flooded those fields for over 100 years and they don't do any crop rotation,
right.
The soil is way too heavy to do anything with. They have now selected for aquatic weeds, right? So the most problematic weeds that we have now, they don't care about the flood. They actually need the flood before they will germinate and emerge.
Right.
So, that was another interesting thing. There's people in the San Joaquin County who grow rice, and they have much softer soil. So we were really looking at rotational options for rice in that county. But up where I worked a lot between Yuba City and Chico, they can't do anything about it. And the joke is, like, if you see a field that you know is historically planted in rice, and they're planting safflower, it's because they're trying to dry up the ground so that they can plant walnuts. Yeah. And one of my colleagues did a lot of research on rice herbicide drift onto tree nuts, because almonds, walnuts, pistachios, so much more profitable than rice.
Right.
Yeah. So pretty interesting stuff. Also really interesting stuff that I feel like we could apply here is, weeds, they like the ideal field conditions that we set up for our crops. And I think Dr. Shrestha has a lot more research potential to look at population genetics and population shifts. But one of my questions is always, now that this field has gone from rice to trees, are those barnyard grass, Echinocloa species going to also stay with the orchard? And I kind of have questions here in Oklahoma, just because we rotate from corn to wheat, those are grass crops. So what do those weeds look like, and do they shift with the crop? Do we secretly have multiple species of ryegrass in the field, and they behave a little bit differently, and that's why we're having these issues? I have some suspicions. I hear Brian over.
No, I have things to say, but I'm not going to. I'll drop it. So you can just go right past this. I've been told very loudly lately that we have weeds because our soil management. That weeds prefer poorer ground, so that's why we need to regenerate our soils so that the weeds go away. You could walk past this question, or you can address it.
A weed is an unwanted plant, and people will come up with 1,000,001 different ways to justify why they have weeds, but weeds are aggressive. And that's why people like me love to study them, because in my opinion, weeds are superior. They're not beholden to, what you want them to do, and they're actually really good at doing what you don't want them to do. So I think it's a little unfair for people to blame it on quote unquote poor soils, because weeds are also plants. And plants love good soil, right? So you can't.
What? The grassy weeds respond amazingly to nitrogen fertilizer.
Shocking.
Well, they've always said if tillage killed weeds, we wouldn't have any weeds. And you can say the same thing when you start looking at fields that have been no-till for years and years. It's like, well, if herbicide killed weeds, then we wouldn't have any weeds there. And it's like you said, they're just resilient. And
yeah. There was a really interesting study done by one of my colleagues in Washington, in the state of Washington, Ian Burke, and he was looking at cheatgrass. And he actually found that across the state of Washington, so the northwestern corner is quite wet. I think they consider that like a temperate forest. But then the southeastern corner is pretty dry. The eastern half of Washington is pretty dry. They found cheatgrass in each kind of gradient region between those two, and each species that they found had adapted to the amount of rainfall, and so they will mature faster under drought conditions because they sense the lack of moisture. And an annual weed's job is to make seed so that it can proliferate for the following season. So the late season drought that we had here in Oklahoma, I bet there was a ton of things that just so that all of the seeds could be in the, and if we had rain, I bet they wouldn't have flowered and seeded so quickly.
Well, if you look on the nutrient side, we can talk broom sedge, other things that show up when the preferred can't compete against them because they're so good at competing. So yeah, you can maybe make your cash crop more competitive, but if the cash crop wasn't there, the weed would still be growing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we have kind of a general rule of thumb in weed science. We teach, I was teaching undergrads at UC Davis, and we do kind of almost like a calculator to say like, okay, we have X number of weeds in year 1, so we choose to control, and we have X number of weeds in year 2, but then in year 5, we're not going to grow a crop, so we don't have to do weed management. And it's a trick question because you absolutely have to do weed management because one amaranth plant, kind of regardless of the species, will produce 500,000 seeds, and only if 1% make it to the dirt, that's a lot of seeds, So 1 year of no control is 7 years of control, right? And even all of us know, even a year of control doesn't mean no control,
right?
It's a constant battle.
I could have sworn the rule of thumb was spray and pray. But
it is. Yeah, it is. Please.
So as part of a dissertation that I need to go back and look at, it was really fascinating.
Was yours?
No. I don't remember that one either, but that's fine.
He prefers to not look at that one.
Using game theory in the development of resistance, and it was really interesting concept from econ on this game theory and the development of resistance, and in management strategies using basically a competitive nature theory. How would you develop? What systems would develop resistance quicker?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, coming from California rice, where you have 5 generations of farmers that have grown rice year after year after year after year after year, they're like, why don't we have more options? I'm like, well, because you used them all. Like you had 6 and you've only ever had 5, and now you have 1, and it just doesn't work all the time.
You do. It's just not called rice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
yeah. Exciting to be back in the state of Oklahoma. Also, a lot of my grad education was in this Mediterranean climate where in the summer it's hot and dry. We don't really have a lot of disease or insect issues in the summer because it's so stinking dry they can't survive. And in the winter it's wet and cold, and we don't do any agriculture in the winter because it's wet and cold. And now I moved back to the state, and as I was moving into my home in August, we were in a drought, and then we got dumped on, and then it froze, and then just like, oh right, back home on the plains.
Spin the weather wheel and see where it lands.
Yeah. It's another exciting component of my job. What's the weather going to do?
You're going to work all crops? I mean, you said broadleaves are easy.
That's
So, relative.
You did say that now.
Yeah, because
she was talking in a wheat system.
Oh, in a wheat system.
Let's preface that.
Let's roll back the tape.
Broadleaf.
There it is.
Can we get a review? We got a challenge flag on the field here.
Broadleaf crops and grass broadleaf weeds and grass crops, much more manageable. But everybody that I talk to has so many grass problems, and that's really the bigger, that's like our big target. Yeah. And honestly, a lot of our colleagues have worked in grass. And so we have a lot of regional pals. Muthu down at Texas A&M has worked on every weed and crop in the state of Texas, and he's a great resource for us. I have a colleague at Penn State who I was a grad student with at UC Davis who's done a ton of ryegrass research, population geneticist. I think my colleague, Dr. Shrestha, and I just have a lot more experience with grass weeds. The need is there, and our network has done a lot more with grass weeds. Yeah. So excited
we're looking
to get
at
after those.
I'm sorry. So we're looking at maybe 2 years before they're all eradicated. 3 years.
So I won't get tenure. Yeah. What's that timeline? Yeah.
Yeah, don't get rid of them until you get tenure. Then we'll get to work.
Well, once she gets rid of the grasses, then she can just go to the easy stuff.
Yeah. Jump over to broadleaves.
The easy stuff. Yeah. The stuff we can see in the fields. No. Something pretty exciting that I would like to work on. There's these short-term goals, right? And our short-term, we really need to do a lot of timing of application studies. There's a lot of need for that. I hear a lot of people complain like, oh, well, my neighbor didn't apply their herbicides until their weeds were 3 feet tall, and now they're confused about why it didn't work. It's like, oh all right, okay. So we can do that. Yeah. But I think these timing of application studies really need to get coupled with like weather conditions, right? Because if a weed is really stressed, it won't take in that herbicide the way that we need it to. So if we're applying under drought conditions, it's not going to take in that herbicide. If we apply under really wet conditions, there's a potential for our herbicide to just go into the creek. So not just timing of application studies, but those coupled with some environmental conditions, because you may scout and do a great job and say, all right, nice, I found my brome. It's at the 2 to 3 leaf stage. This is the weakest point in its growing cycle. I'm going to zap it. But if the environmental conditions aren't right, that herbicide isn't going to work the way that we expect it to. Yeah.
That's been a big discussion the last couple of years because, we...
At least 2.
Sorry, I didn't
possibly
drop that in there.
At least 2.
I might just sit back over here and just
continue on. Finally got him to talk.
Yeah.
But that's been a big discussion point in the last since 19 and then beyond. Is you get good scouts, and we see these weeds that are coming out, and then you go through with something that worked, but it's been 30 days since it's got a rainfall, and then you come back and the herbicide didn't work, and it's like, well, I mean, nothing's growing right now. I mean, that plant needs to go through metabolism for a lot of these things to kind of work. So that's been a big, I mean, even this time of year when growers go out and they see weeds in their wheat or alfalfa or something like that, and they're like, well, I want to spray it, and it's like, it's not, we need to temper our expectations right now because nothing's really growing right now. So maybe hold that off until February and roll that down.
How do if you look at the crop in the ground now or later, and maybe this is where your research, you look at it, I've got a weed, I've identified it, but I don't have rain in 30 days. So if it keeps growing, it will be out of the growth stage I want. So what are some thought processes a farmer should consider on pulling the trigger?
That's a great question.
Hey,
that's a great question.
Yep. Okay.
No, that's a good question. I'm also, a gentleman the other day was talking to me about his wheat, and he said he went out to his field. It looked clean. He planted and ran a chisel, just a real shallow chisel through the field, planted, and then he got all these weeds that came up. And I was like, well, they are cool season annuals, and the soil does have a temperature buffer because it's 25% water, right? See, I learned stuff. I remembered. I learned stuff.
That wasn't my class, but all right.
Okay.
We'll send a note to Jeff Hattie that you were successful there.
Yeah, call him. But he was just so surprised that all these weeds came up after he disturbed the soil. And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of what you would expect because they've been warm in their little soil pocket, and now you've disturbed the soil, and they are getting exposed to these really cold air temperatures, and so they're germinating and emerging. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity, if we have some plant opportunities to do a little bit of soil disturbance as a means of causing weed seeds to germinate so that we can target them before we plant our crop.
If you tell an Oklahoma farmer there's a reason to till, I think they're on board. You've got it 100% on. But
well, and we're not talking about serious tillage, We're talking about a little 1-inch tillage event, Get your kids out there to kick dirt around. It's pretty much the same thing, Now, for the long term, some of these questions, my undergrad lab assistant wants to do research, and he was like, I found a bunch of good stuff on brome from 20 years ago. And I was like, oh, okay. So our short-term goals are to try to update a lot of the information that is already available, double checking that, ryegrass, I think Misha, Dr. Manicherry, now Dr. Bird, was the one that discovered resistance just based on the International Herbicide Resistance Database. It was logged in 2019.
That sounds right.
So I assume that she found that.
Post picked it up and she finalized it.
Yeah. So, that was very recent. Mm-hmm. And some of our older publications don't have that kind of information incorporated into it. So short term, really need to update our publications. I'm 85% extension, and a big part of what I need and want to do are continuing ed courses. So we're not just updating the websites, we're going and talking to people in person. Timing of application studies, real applied, we need to see this info now because it's pertinent at this moment. The longer term, which I think from a nerdy science perspective is very exciting, had a really good conversation with Wesley from the Mesonet. Something that I worked on a lot during my PhD is, so you have weedy rice, same genus and species, it's rice, so you can't scout for it. It looks exactly like your crop. And a lot of California rice is aerially seeded, so you can't just look down the row and say oh, there's a weed. It's all the same stuff. So what I really worked on was, what are the environmental conditions, mostly temperature and moisture? What are the environmental conditions that will induce germination? Because if you can predict germination, you can predict okay, in the next month or in the next 3 weeks, 90% of the weeds that are in my top 1 inch are going to emerge. Those are studies that I think will greatly help with this timing of application type stuff, and just give growers a bigger window, hey, in the next month before, August 31st, on August 1st, we're sending out notifications hey, in the next 30 days, plan something. Don't wait until September because you're going to be too late. I would really like to partner with the Mesonet. So I don't know if y'all use their widget, and it links you to their website, and they have all of those really cool predictor tools. Yep. I think Myra Duffick, the new pathologist, one of her big research projects is to validate the I can't remember what pathogen it is on the Mesonet, but she was like, oh, this hasn't been ground truthed in 17 years. So that's my big project. And I was like, cool. I want to do that exact same thing, but for weeds.
Nice.
That is a big project. That took me 5 years to do the germination study, the emergence study, put all the data together, ground truth it over 2 years. So that's that's in the longer term. But I think people like the Mesonet. It's so user-friendly. And if we can contribute to that somehow from a weed science perspective, I think that'll help people even more with their timing of application stuff.
So then on your studies that you have now, then, or do you know what data you're going to start collecting, environmental conditional data that you would have that starts building that database for your tool?
Yeah, so all seeds are beholden to temperature and moisture.
Okay.
And some seeds need light, some need nitrogen, some need oxygen, blah blah blah, but you can make almost anything germinate at the right temperature with the right amount of moisture.
Yeah.
I also don't have a grad student yet. I just started on October 1st. So once I get a grad student or even a tech or somebody to start really getting into this, that will, maybe we do look at solar radiation or something like that. But it depends on the species. There's actually a lot of pretty good biology type data like that from other researchers. So if a researcher says like, oh, nitrogen is imperative to the germination of cheatgrass, whatever, then we'll include that in our experiments. But I think just based on what the mesonet has to offer, in California, they don't have a mesonet. I was like, what is it? What are you guys doing? You're supposed to be like a world-renowned institution and you don't watch the weather? Like what?
They have an almanac.
Yeah. They're like, well,
70
last
degrees
year,
all year. What are you going to do?
San Diego,
our growing season is 360 days, so we don't check the weather. Like, oh, okay. And I was trying to build similar models for rice producers, but they were like, well, we don't know our soil temperature. It's like, oh, losers. Sorry.
Hey,
Bruce Lindquist will hear that.
This goes to California.
I know. Just kidding,
if
guys.
If the wind's right, it
Whitney,
bounces and all that. Yeah.
Kasim, I'm so sorry.
Late at night.
Yeah, late at night. There is a time change.
Right.
But I think having that pinpointed data through the mesonet, all of those weather stations, and even being able to link personal weather stations to that, will give you really good, high prediction power, really. Yeah. My issue during my PhD was, I'm just one person, and I had one field site because nobody would let me plant weedy rice in their field. The plight of the weed scientists is that everybody wants you to do the research, but nobody wants you to come to their field to check it out.
Nobody wants the plots where the weed scientist has been.
Yeah, I was going there.
Oh yeah,
that's always fun.
I was gonna say, there was a few plots when I arrived on October 1st that were already planted for me. I was like, oh, good, great. I'm gonna go find what's out there.
Those are Brian's plots.
Yeah.
That's because I took over the weed science plots.
Yeah.
So
fair.
there's a lot of crop sciences direction there. Are you looking into pasture weeds also?
Not immediately, and quite frankly, probably not pre-tenure. Mostly because my background is very agronomy, conventional ag focused. My mother's side of the family has a cow-calf operation off I-35 down near Purcell. And we spent a lot of time on that farm as kids. And even as adults, it's like where we spend our holidays and things like that. And I really, pasture and range are pretty close to my heart. And I think invasive species are so fascinating. And there's a lot of opportunity with like early detection and rapid response, community science. You can get kids involved with like invasive species stuff. So I'm really interested in it, but it's not my current area of expertise. And so as a means of maintaining long-term job security, probably not what I'm going to go after. Unless Alex Roccatelli comes to me and says, I have this problem, I need you to work with me on it. It's like, okay, sure.
Oh my God, we got weeds in my pasture. sorry, that's my Alex impression. Oh my God.
Is he Italian or is he Brazilian?
I think he's actually both.
It's in Brazil. You have never mind.
Okay.
A long-term Italian, so he's a Brazilian Italian.
Okay.
Well,
Italian Brazilian.
Years ago, whenever I interviewed him, he was, oh my God, we do. I thought, you're from Brazil.
Who is this guy?
And then he explained that there's lineage back to Italy and all that. So.
Yeah. Okay.
A couple countries
came
into Brazil at a certain period of time. So.
Yeah. Portuguese. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. There's all types of. Yeah. It's a melting pot.
Italian,
of South America.
Yeah.
So I kind of been doing the math in my when you talked about
God.
I do math in my head. I'm an engineer. So what is it? Solve differential equations at breakfast for fun.
Yikes. Okay.
I don't. But the whole prediction part of should I be getting ready to spray, because and I guess the thing that I've been thinking about is, okay, what's our capacity, because it seems like we're always behind on spraying, and we're running 90 to 120 foot booms everywhere now, at double digit speeds if the field allows it,
which is incredible.
So you have this massive capacity within the field, but I don't think that we have that broad scale. And I'll compare it to corn, and I've done I don't remember the exact numbers right now off the top of my head, but I believe we have the capacity to plant the entire country, all of our corn, in a week.
Yeah,
we have that much planting capacity in the U.S. that we could plant the entire corn crop in a week. I don't think we could spray it in a week.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah,
and
well, that makes sense. I mean, look at custom planter versus custom sprayers.
Yeah.
And there's I put this in one of my lectures whenever I give a lecture about modeling, but it's I think George Box was the one that said all models are wrong, just some are useful. Right. And so these models that I was building, I'm a pretty smart guy, these models that I was building, mostly because I only had one field site to validate, they were only 40% accurate, and so putting these on the mesonet would, from a trust perspective, from a, we know what we're talking about, I don't want to put something out to the public that they will think is poo-poo. I would prefer to be more like 60-75% accurate, but it's going to become more accurate if growers have weather stations in their fields. If you go out and bury a data logger somewhere, I buy data loggers for $65 and bury them, and then they're Bluetoothed, so you don't even have to dig them up. You can go out there and what that is helpful for is all plants are beholden to temperature accumulation, right? And so a lot of those models on the mesonet are growing degree day based, and that's how these models would function. Soil temperature is going to give you the best prediction, because that's what temperature the seed is, and if your back 80 is a different temperature, or it's higher up on a hill, so it's getting windier,
north face, south face.
Exactly. So you take that prediction with a grain of salt, but I think it also helps growers know when to scout.
I was about to say they're getting used to that with disease models. I mean, it's not saying, because you look at the disease triangle, just like pest triangle, weeds, you have the environment, you have the host. They have to scout to see if they actually have the inoculum or the start of it. So it'd be the same thing. It's a trigger to scout.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I have no doubt that you can build something. It's going to take time. If you get the biology right.
Yeah.
And then I think there's things you can add to it. But the predictive capability of it is the way that you deal with the capacity issue that you have. Because now you're not saying, go spray. You're going, hey, you better be thinking about it.
Yeah.
You better make sure you got a pallet of herbicide sitting here.
Yeah.
Because the stuff's going to show up, and then you better be ready to go.
Yeah.
See, I think that's the thin line to walk, because the social issue that we've run into with like a dollar spot calculator, I mean, that's been used on golf courses for so many years, but it's gotten such a negative whack from an IPM standpoint, because the golf course managers have turned that in from I need to start scouting to I need to start spraying. And so that's the thin line from a social aspect we have to watch. Is we can't make these into a application tool of saying, okay, the right conditions are there, so I'm going to go apply. And it only takes 2 or 3 good successful years, because I don't think any grower would do it and waste chemical just right now. But if they see it works and it sees how easy they've got it, then now it starts becoming an application tool, not a scouting tool. And I think that's a big thing that you have to watch, is if you see, hey, you can get ahead of the weeds here by doing this, let's
you were too far ahead of them.
Yeah, let's.
Yeah.
And then we get into the same issue that maybe, they didn't germinate this week; they're germinating next week. Well, now that application's for nothing because you didn't catch them.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing.
But you said something else earlier about citizen science when you're talking about the pasture stuff.
Yeah.
So now once you build, you get something built. That's where you come in and go, hey, are you scouting? What did you see on a north slope, on a south-facing slope, on hilltops and creek bottoms? And so now, and you can georeference everything. And now then your database starts getting built, and you're going, hey, we have validation that this is happening.
Yeah.
You still ought to go look at your own field instead of fire the sprayer up. But
how much diversity in this kind of aspect do you have? Like you said, you have potentially different biotypes of the same species and different species just in general. Like how much diversity in that can you really pack into to something like that to put on like something like the mesonet?
So it really depends on what the growers want. What your herbicide options are, right? If you have one weed and one herbicide that works like crap, that's probably not the target for the mesonet, just because low success rate for me. I need to be able to show that I can create a good product. But when I was studying weedy rice, we actually had 5 different accessions that I would study, and they were all genetically different from each other. So I rolled those all into one study to say, okay, do these behave differently? The ones that don't, this is going to be a blanket for those 3. For types 2, 1, 3, and 4 are so genetically closely related, and they behave very similarly in the field. So here's a model for these types, and here's a model for those types. And that's really where me as Professor Dr. Galvin is going to have to figure out, how do we turn this into a better grower tool? Do we need to have a wheat model, or do we need to have a ryegrass model that is applied to all systems? Do we need to have all weeds and corn? You also have to consider seasonality. There's our winter annuals and our summer annuals. There's also a big difference between annuals and perennials. So if you get into Johnson grass, that's a different. Those weeds behave very differently.
That's different because then you got seedling Johnson grass versus rhizome Johnson grass, and those are basically 2 different animals that you're having to struggle. Well, and I wonder on this kind of thing, because I know back when I worked in rice, those fields were pretty consistent from front to back. You're working with Oklahoma soils that, you got sand pockets and sand veins and stuff like that, and how much of that, soil differences, soil textural differences would impact what you would see in this kind of situation.
I definitely, from a growing degree day perspective, your sandy soils aren't going to hold as much water, so they're not going to be able to buffer the temperature as much. Probably going to see weeds popping up in your sandy soils much earlier than your heavy clay soils, partly because of the physical requirements for the seed to pop through the soil, but also because of that temperature buffering capacity. So really, it's going to depend on who wants to give me money, right? So if the wheat growers give me money, it's definitely going to be a ryegrass calculator. But I think you made a really good point of the cultural piece. A big part of my job is continuing ed.
Yeah.
And I would not put out, I think I've learned enough from studying herbicides and in weed science to know that you don't put out a product before you deeply talk about it and give those continuing ed classes and say hey, here's the IPM ladder. You got to start with reading your old notes and timing your scouting events. And if you don't have old notes about when these weeds come up, don't worry. We've got the Mesonet app, but it's not a timing of application tool. It's a planning tool. Yeah. Because the other thing too is I don't want a grower to call me and be like, well, your app told me to spray and I did, and now I have weeds. It's well, okay, you're right. So
the app, like you said, doesn't tell you to spray. It tells you to scout.
Yeah, tells you to get your butt in the field. Yeah. Or get your kids in the field, right? Yeah. Send your kids out.
All of the local ag students.
Yeah, all those 4-H kids.
So you could take it one step. If I put all my parameters in, this is my field.
Sure.
And I put all these parameters in, then now instead of me checking it, I can get an alert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, it says, hey, this field is one that conditions are starting to develop.
Yes.
This is what you should be looking for. Here's a picture of it, by the way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you see this little critter out there, you know, warm the sprayer up.
Yeah.
Or if you see a certain number of them. But.
Yeah. And that's also, you know, out here in this field here at the agronomy farm, plot number 16, it's got bromus in it, cheatgrass. Well, I started an experiment out there with Ryan Bryant from UPL. Really excited about the Iron Gate technology. They've been testing it up in Kansas for a while. It's specifically for cheatgrass control, and that field hasn't been seeded with any cheatgrass in a while. And so I was like, hey, before I commit to this study, let me go out and see if I have any. And I'm looking on the OSU website trying to figure out what, you know, freshly emerged bromus looks like. Oh, dang. I got to figure, you know, we need to update these publications, you know. I found it. It's little. It was very little. But I think that's another piece. Can we also do a community science project to get a bunch of people to send us pictures of their brome and then sift through it, be like, oh, this is actually ryegrass, you know, this is goat grass, like this isn't, you know.
When I was new faculty, one of the things I did on extension was do a annual nutrient deficiency contest.
Yeah.
And so I built a library.
Who has the most deficient?
No, the best pitcher. So it's like the best pitcher came in.
See my buckle?
Yeah. Taylor won every year.
Deficient.
But
sorry,
a photo contest, right?
Yeah.
And so I built my library for class off of that contest. I'd give out a couple hats or a jacket or something every year, and it was.
And a buckle.
And a buckle.
Yeah.
Well,
and a
to
buckle.
the champion.
Something, you know, I'm new faculty, so all these ideas are floating around in my head, and I need to sit down for a week and organize my thoughts, but
it doesn't do any good.
Yeah, I know. Now I just have a flow chart on the wall, you know, like it's not. But we, Dr. Shrestha and I, really want to try to reinvigorate the herbicide screening program. If people expect or suspect that they have resistance or even tolerance in their fields, they can send us their weeds, send us some seed. We will grow it out and spray it. Either send them a report or not. You know, some people might be like, oh, I just, you know, get it out of here. That is going to do a lot of different things. It's going to help Dr. Shrestha formulate more in-depth research questions, but it's also going to help me figure out what are growers dealing with. Several of my colleagues at UC Davis formulated whole PhDs based on these program results. They're finding like chromosome, poor timing of application. The weed that they were targeting actually had delayed emergence and required 3 weeks of wet chilling, and that's what, you know, there's like all these little pieces, and we don't know what's happening until growers send us something. So we wanted to reinvigorate that screening program, but wouldn't it be cool to try to engage 4-H or FFA to do some kind of almost like this nutrient deficiency, but do not just scouting, but weed identification. You know, and grasses are so difficult to differentiate. So can we do some kind of continuing ed where we don't just work with growers and adults, we also work with kids, because little kids are very close to the ground already, right? Yeah. They have great eyeballs. And is there a way for us to kind of like engage 4-H, reinvigorate this spraying program, get people interested in weed science, because weed science is exciting, you guys. You know, I don't have to tell you guys. So there's a lot of things in the works, but timing of application, figuring out herbicide resistance, and doing a lot of that through this screening program is on the agenda.
I would tell faculty, usually when you start your career in the first year, you're taking out fence on both sides of the road.
Yeah,
because there's everywhere. By the second year, you're mostly missing the fence and you're just in the ditches a lot. By about the third year, you're actually in your lane a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so, but it's because there's opportunities everywhere, and you've got good ideas, and I think that the things that you're planning are really good. They're achievable.
Yeah.
I like the long-term goal because that's a tool that really can help people and motivate them. I think to do some of these social things we talked about, scouting and some other things like that.
Yeah. But how long until you're back in the ditch?
That happens all the time.
That's when you're about ready to retire and your eyesight's not what it used to be. But the nice thing is you're driving slower as you reach the end of your career. So
I'm going the wrong direction anyway. So
and my turn signal's on all the time.
You're always trying to turn left from the right lane. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us on the Red Dirt Agronomy podcast. It's been a lot of fun, and again, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation of the Red Dirt Agronomy podcast. Just a quick reminder that we will be at the KNID AgriFest this Friday and Saturday, January 12th and 13th, in the Oklahoma Wheat Commission's booth, recording a couple of episodes of the Red Dirt Agronomy podcast. So if you're out and about, come by and see us. We may even get you on the podcast as well. We'd like to say a special thanks to Oklahoma State University's Dr. Liberty Galvin for coming on the show with us today. And to find out more about her or any of our guests, along with any of the resources that we talked about on today's episode or any previous episode, visit reddirtagronomy.com. There you will find show notes, and you can listen to past episodes too. For Dr. Josh Lofton, Dr. Randy Taylor, and Dr. Brian Arnell, I am the not a doctor, but I play one on a podcast, Dave Deacon, and we all want to thank you for listening. The proceeding is a copyrighted recording of Ag Now Media, LLC, 2024. And yes, all rights are reserved.